Hi, everyone. Sorry, we are experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties today. I wanted to go ahead and start the broadcast, but just wanted to give you all the heads up. We're gonna we're gonna go forward as best we can, but Aisha we will be able to hear her, but she actually can't hear us. So there's a little bit of communication issue going to be there. Also, Grace, our normal person who's kind of behind the scenes, who can share their screen and can continue on. For some reason, that's not able to do. Oh, okay. Now we are.
Just fixed it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great. So, but Aisha still, I don't think can hear us. So, but I will wave her on and, or I'll set the chat for her to be able to know when it's her time. So I just wanted to say welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who is interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session, behind the scenes, tips for sponsorship groups working collaboratively with resettlement staff. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there is a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box, and there will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box, and we will try our best to assist you, as we're having our own technical issues. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenter for today, and our presenter is Aisha Hassan, Community Engagement Organizer with CWS, and I will go ahead and pass it over to Aisha.
Great, thank you, Derek. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Okay, if you see me picking up the phone and putting it to my ear, that's because that's the only way I can hear anyone else. So it's work from home virtual life, right? We make do with what we can. Thank you so much, Derek. I didn't get to hear that introduction, but I'm sure it was lovely. I appreciate RWC and glad to be here. I'm going to start off with a presentation, followed by a Q&A with one of CWS's local resettlement offices in Indianapolis. And after that, we will then move to a Q&A with you, the audience. Next slide, please. I'd like to start off by sharing a little bit about Church World Service. So Church World Service is a faith-based organization transforming communities around the globe through just and sustainable responses to hunger, poverty, displacement, and disaster. Next slide, please. Church World Service was founded in the wake of World War II when 17 different denominations came together to form an agency to do in partnership what none of us could hope to do so well alone. Next slide, please. Our vision is a world where all have food, voice, and a safe place to call home. Next slide. So as Derek mentioned, my name is Aisha Hassan, and I'm a community engagement organizer with CWS. I've been working with refugees and immigrants in various capacities since 2015, and I'm so glad to be here with you all today. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a level set to just make sure we're all on the same page with regards to this training. During this webinar, we will be providing general background knowledge about co-sponsorship at the local level, along with some general best practices on how to work collaboratively with local resettlement staff. It's really important to remember that every resettlement office is unique and will approach your settlement their own way. I'd like to encourage viewers who are co-sponsors to use this webinar to think more broadly about how you can engage with your co-sponsorship staff in a more collaborative way. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with what co-sponsorship actually is. So co-sponsorship is when a community group accepts in a non-legally binding written agreement with a resettlement agency the responsibility to provide or ensure the provision of reception and placement services to certain refugees sponsored by that local resettlement agency. Next slide, please. Next, I wanted to go over a little bit about the history of co-sponsorship. So in actuality, communities, one slide back, please. Thank you. In actuality, communities have been welcoming refugees for decades through co-sponsorship across the United States. The Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, also known as PRM, which is the Humanitarian Bureau of the State Department, recently defined the term co-sponsorship as a community group providing a majority of all core services to refugees, individuals, or families. This new definition explicitly differentiates co-sponsorship from other types of community sponsorship. And this has had a direct impact on the way in which resettlement officers engage with co-sponsored groups like yourself. And we're going to talk a bit more about that as we go on. Next slide, please. Next, I wanted to start with some just important things to keep in mind and to remember when you are approaching co-sponsorship and working with a local agency. First, your office may be new to co-sponsorship as defined by PRM. And PRM, again, is that Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. So standing up a new program has a wide range of challenges that may impact the process of launching this new program. So be a little bit proactive and find out if this is a new program for your local resettlement office, and be mindful of the learning curve that may exist for the agency. Next is that your co-sponsorship staff member may be new to co-sponsorship. So while some officers may be well seasoned when it comes to co-sponsorship, even by the new definition, it's still good to keep in mind that co-sponsorship staff may be new to the program, or resettlement agency staff like case managers. So there might be a bit of a learning curve there. This is an opportunity ultimately to help your local office advance their program. So this is really an exciting time for the agency and for their new co-sponsors, and we really hope that together you'll chart the path forward for a successful program. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to highlight some important considerations when working through co-sponsorship with local offices. The first being client caseload, excuse me. So local offices are usually resettling multiple refugee individuals and families all at the same time. This is why case managers may not be able to see to a specific client's needs at the very moment you bring up the issue. So we really ask you to just be mindful of this caseload that staff are carrying when you do reach out to them for assistance. And remember that the family you are assisting is not the only family that the resettlement agency is currently serving. Next, we want to touch on co-sponsorship caseload. So co-sponsorship staff may be managing, and more than likely are managing, multiple different co-sponsorship teams who are at different stages of their commitment. That could be, through that intensive onboarding process, or the first 1 to 4 weeks of being paired with a family, or several weeks down towards, or months towards the point where they're winding up the co-sponsorship. This means that there may be multiple team leads requesting information and needing guidance all at once. So we ask you to please be mindful when interacting with your co-sponsorship staff person of this wider caseload that they are probably managing when it comes to co-sponsorship teams. Next, we've got client confidentiality. And this is one that I find, in my experience, having worked with co-sponsors, can sometimes be easily overlooked because it's not the thing that's at the forefront of our minds all the time. Staff may be dealing with sensitive client information that is not always appropriate to be shared with a co-sponsor team. So keep this in mind if a case manager or co-sponsorship coordinator is intentionally omitting information. So for example, if a co-sponsorship staff member asks you to provide transportation to a client to a specific appointment and explicitly states that it is a private appointment, or if they do not tell you what the appointment is for, but they just tell you this is the time they need to be dropped off, this is the time they need to be picked up. Be cognizant of the fact that this might be a private information, and don't ask unless you really think that is imperative to achieving the goal of providing assistance transportation. And just be mindful that you may be told by staff, this is private information, and we're not at will to provide that information. And just remember that, client confidentiality is a really important part of providing trauma-informed services to our clients. Next is documentation. Probably the least exciting part of co-sponsorship, but a very important part nonetheless. Staff are required to provide case notes for all core services provided to refugees in their service. These case notes are checked in program monitoring done by national resettlement agencies like Church World Service and by PRM. So always complete case notes and communicate with your staff point of contact if there's a reason you're unable to complete a case note, and help them to make an alternative plan to get that case noting done. Number 5 is trust. Staff have a list of core services they are required to provide to refugees on a specific timeline. Know that you are only responsible for providing the services you agree to in your MOU or co-sponsorship agreement signed with the agency. All other services will be provided by the agency. Now, we realize that clients might be asking you about specific appointments or core services that are being provided by the agency. And we ask that if you're receiving these inquiries, that you ask the client to contact their assigned case manager. You are, of course, welcome to share with your co-sponsor contact at the agency that, hey, so-and-so is really asking me a lot about their Social Security appointment. That's not something we deal with. Like, is that, how's that going? You're welcome to do that, but we ask that you please try to direct the client to engaging directly with their case manager or their case management team around these issues. It's really important that we trust in the work that that the agency is doing, just in the way that the agency is trusting in you as a co-sponsor to provide those core services you have agreed to. And then lastly is boundaries. Staff are going to model boundary setting in their day-to-day work and will encourage co-sponsors to do the same. So for example, staff will not be on call for clients 24/7, and you shouldn't be either. We ask that you respect staff boundaries and use them as an example to follow when creating boundaries of your own when it comes to providing services for the client. We know that setting boundaries is far, far easier said than done, but they will be instrumental in ensuring you engage with newcomers in a sustainable way. Remember that setting boundaries is an ongoing process that's going to require some repetition and probably some enforcement or reinforcement. It's also important to remember that newcomers are typically highly resourceful individuals just by the pure fact that they've gotten to where they are today. And they can find support and build networks on their own too. So your boundaries will not be the end of a newcomer's opportunity to receive help. And just remember that you have that in your mind. You are not the end all and be all of that client support network when they arrive here. Our clients are highly resourceful and very motivated to, get by, as they have done for so many years to get to where they are at this moment in time. Okay, next slide, please. Now we're going to get into kind of the meat and potatoes of this training so far, which is discussing the mindsets for successful co-sponsorship. I'm going to talk about 4 helpful mindsets for successful co-sponsorship, along with some best practices for each mindset. These mindsets include, as you can see on the screen, being flexible, working collaboratively, teaching and not doing, and beginning with the end in mind. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off with flexibility. Flexibility is absolutely essential when working in refugee resettlement, especially as a co-sponsor. Now, the fact is that there is limited information known about a refugee family before they arrive to the US. So it's important to be flexible and approach co-sponsorship with an open mind. Keep in mind that your co-sponsorship staff may also have limited information about incoming arrivals, and they're going to do their best to pair you with a family or individual as best they can when with the information that they have at hand. Next slide. So some best practices for being flexible. The first is to prepare your group for uncertainty. Again, something that's a lot easier said than done. While local affiliate staff are well versed in uncertainty, in the uncertainty that refugee resettlement presents, it's very likely that your team is not. Work to try and inoculate your team against the anxiety that uncertainty may bring by acknowledging it up front at the start and reminding your team to be aware of it throughout their experience. Again, a little bit of repetition doesn't necessarily hurt, and reminding folks that, this is not an exact science. Refugee resettlement isn't. While there are a lot of standardized practices in refugee resettlement, there's always going to be need for room flexibility. Next, do the best you can with what you have. Oh, sorry, not next slide, next point. My bad. As we discussed, you will not always have all the information you wish you had about the family before they arrive. So work with what you do have and leave room for changes and plans down the road. Your co-sponsorship staff will likely not have all the answers and all the information you will need or want. Keep this in mind as you request info from the co-sponsorship staff, and just remember that they ultimately have limitations themselves. So an example of this is going to be dealing with employment authorization cards, or EADs. It may take some time for these employment authorization cards to arrive, which will have very tangible impacts on the integration of the family you are supporting. This is outside of the local staff's control. So what can you do? You work with what you have. So for example, use food banks and do additional fundraising to support the family if they're unable to work as soon as they would like to. Find other resources in the community that can, fill in the gaps from where a readily available income might fit in. Just keeping this open mindset and being flexible is going to be really helpful. And there very often are workarounds to a lot of the challenges we see. So in summary, really just work with what you have and be flexible. Our next bullet point is checking your expectations. It's normal to have expectations about how things are going to go when the newcomer family arrives, right? It's really exciting. You're envisioning it, and you've got these ideas of what it might be like. It is important to acknowledge that these are your own personal expectations, and you should not be imposing these on the family once they do arrive. Even if you have co-sponsored a family in the past, it's important to know that no two families are alike, and each experience is going to be unique. Lastly, communicate effectively with your staff point of contact and your team. Being flexible can get confusing if everyone is not on the same page. So be sure you have identified a team lead to manage communication between your group and the local office contact. You should also be sure that you have an easy and efficient way of communicating updates and planning changes to the team, whether it is via WhatsApp group chat or via an email thread or any other method, but making sure you've got that line of communication with your team up and functioning is going to be really important. Next slide, please. Now we'll touch on working collaboratively. Working collaboratively with local resettlement agency will be paramount to the success of your co-sponsorship. When co-sponsoring, you ultimately agree to work in collaboration with your local resettlement agency to welcome a newcomer individual family. So make sure you have open lines of communication between your co-sponsor team lead and the resettlement agency. That does not mean that everyone in the co-sponsorship group is going to have readily accessible or pathways of readily accessible communication to the agency, but that team lead is really ideally going to have that. So you should also be working in good faith with the agency that they are doing what they said that they are doing, just as they are having good faith in you that you are doing what you agreed to on your end of the agreement. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to go over some best practices for working collaboratively. The first is to set and meet expectations. Working with local staff can be complicated if expectations have not been set. So make sure you understand what you as a co-sponsor group have committed to and stick to your commitment. Now, if you can't meet an expectation, it's really important that you communicate to the local office as early as possible the reason or what cannot be met and the reason for why that is. As we said earlier, being flexible is really key, and that does go both ways. Next, communicate early and often. Communicating with your local resettlement staff early and often will set you up for success as a co-sponsor. While last-minute hiccups are at times unavoidable, always try to communicate with your co-sponsorship staff about issues as early as possible. It's also important to keep regular contact with your resettlement agency. We know that being a co-sponsor is a lot of work and you get really busy, but making sure you have regular touch base and communication and check-ins with your agency is going to be really important. While the frequency of your contact with the agency might change over time as you become more established and you get the hang of things and you're moving more into goals-oriented work instead of those core services, always try to have an open line of communication with the office. Next is respect boundaries. It is so essential that staff create boundaries to safeguard their longevity in resettlement work. Respecting the boundaries that they have and using these boundaries to help inform your own boundaries is going to be really important. So for example, think about what times of day you're available to the newcomer individual or family. Think about how quickly you respond to questions and what kind of response you offer, what kind of support you're offering when they're asking. If they're saying, we don't have enough food for groceries this week, are you immediately running out and purchasing those groceries for them? Or are you saying, hey, let's sit down, let's look at your budget, like what's going on? Are you trying to take a deeper look and helping them be proactive about planning for the future? As we mentioned earlier, setting boundaries is hard, ongoing work, but we encourage boundary setting because it really does increase your longevity as a co-sponsor as well. And then just to reiterate, build trust. We ask that you trust that the office staff know what they are doing and will do what they have agreed to. If newcomers, and more than likely when newcomers approach you with complaints about services maybe not being provided or case managers not being in touch with them, encourage the newcomer to contact their case manager and make an appointment to meet with them. You should not be contacting the case manager on their behalf. We really ask you and emphasize this point of trust, because trust in the local office doing what they're doing is really going to be paramount to your success and not overextending yourself as a co-sponsor as well. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to talk about teaching how. So your goal as a co-sponsor is to help the newcomer integrate into their local community. Focusing on teaching how and not doing for will go a long way when considering mindsets for success in co-sponsorship. The newcomer ultimately cannot integrate if they become dependent on you and your team for constant guidance and instruction. It's so important to remember that your co-sponsorship will have an end date, and the newcomer family or individual will have to continue their integration journey without you. And that is 100% okay. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about some best practices for teaching how instead of doing for. The first is to put in the time. We are very mindful that doing something for someone is often much, much easier and less time consuming than teaching someone how to do something themselves. We ask that you be intentional with the time you spend with the newcomer. If you really want the newcomer to have the best chance at integration, then you must be willing to put in the time to train and support newcomers through the learning process. So practicing how to do activities will instill a sense of confidence in newcomers. Use your time to help support newcomers in doing tasks that we may take for granted, such as simple, things that might seem simple enough as making an appointment or using the local transportation system. Next, I'd like to go into some examples of how you can teach how instead of doing for. Consider sitting with a newcomer while they make appointments over the phone, or help walk them through how to make appointments online. Do this by doing it first for them, next instructing them on how to do it, and then watching them do it independently. Is a really good method of showing and then getting to the point where the newcomer is doing the activity themselves. Instead of transporting the family to all their appointments, consider riding the bus with them to an appointment instead, or instruct them on how to use a free Medicaid ride. And another big one is when dealing with money orders. Money orders are used by many newcomers to pay rent. Help newcomers become familiar with this process by supporting their understanding of how to obtain a money order by first doing it for them with them watching, then instructing them on how to do it themselves, and then watching while they obtain a money order and while they obtain a money order and pay their rent independently. And then lastly, ask your local staff for ideas. Your local staff are really the experts, and they will have more guidance to help you learn how to teach clients instead of doing for. Next slide, please. Okay, my final and one of my favorite mindsets, because it seems to be something that's most challenging for folks, so I think it's really important, is keeping the end in mind. It is so important to remember that you will be a co-sponsor for a limited number of months. While co-sponsors are encouraged to build enduring friendships with refugee individuals and families, your role as a co-sponsor should come to an end, and your role as a neighbor and friend should last for the long run. It is also important to note that your resettlement agency may not have the capacity to manage your co-sponsorship for any longer than they have agreed to. This is why it is so essential to focus on empowering clients instead of building dependency. Next slide, please. So let's discuss some best practices for keeping the end in mind. Clearly identify an end date of your co-sponsorship from the beginning of your co-sponsorship. Work with your local office to make everyone involved in the co-sponsorship aware of the co-sponsorship timeline in the first meeting you have with the newcomer family. Next, have regular check-ins where you bring up how many months you have left in your commitment. You should be checking in with both your local office and the newcomer to remind everyone that you're nearing the end of the co-sponsorship at regular intervals. It's suggested as a best practice that you do this at least once a month for co-sponsorships that are 6 months or less, or longer, excuse me. Support for the family should shift from doing for to teaching how as the co-sponsor progresses. As discussed in the last mindset, it's recommended that you change the type of support you provide to the family over time. So for example, start with driving the family to their appointments at first, maybe in that first 1 to 2 weeks. Then train them how to use the public transport system over time, travel with them to different places. And then encourage newcomers to use public transportation independently further down the road. And then lastly, and something that I think is very important, is marking the end of your co-sponsorship with a celebration. It can be helpful for the local office, the newcomer family or individual, and you as a co-sponsor to have a celebration at the end of your co-sponsorship. You can do this by meeting in a mutually agreed upon location, somewhere that's neutral, like an apartment building clubhouse. Having the celebration can create time for both the co-sponsor and the newcomer to reflect on their time together and show appreciation. And this can also offer a sense of closure for all parties involved. So we really recommend having a substantial moment where everything culminates in a final celebration. And that leaves the end of my presentation on some mindsets and best practices. Next slide, please. I'm now very excited to pass or share the mic rather, with our guest speaker today. Cassandra Sanborn is the Director of Development at Exodus Refugee Immigration in Indianapolis. She oversees Exodus's fundraising, volunteer program, and other community engagement work. She has 13 years of experience in community engagement and has been working in the resettlement space since 2021. So really excited to have Cassandra with us. And I'm going to ask folks to please give me a moment, because I'm going to be doing this over the phone so I can hear Cassandra's answers, and we're going to just see how this goes.
Okay, thank you. Can
Cassandra,
you hear me?
One.
Yes, we can hear you. Are you able to turn on your camera? If not, it's okay, but.
Yes, I'm trying to get it on here.
No problem.
There we go.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Cassandra. It's been such a pleasure working with you, and I'm really glad to have you here. Just to hear from someone on the ground who is dealing with managing co-sponsorship, and to give people a little bit of perspective and insight into what it's like on your end. So my first question for you is, from your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions about the refugee resettlement process that co-sponsors have?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I think you already covered some of this in your presentation. But one misconception I think people have is definitely how in control of things the local offices are. We've definitely had people set up for co-sponsorships before and then had a flight delayed suddenly, or a family not show up when a co-sponsor was at the airport and ready to go. Or as you said, delayed EUDs or other things like that. And so I think just knowing that the resettlement agency on the ground is doing our best to keep you in the loop about all of those unexpected changes that are outside of our control is really key. And that's a big misconception that we see.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks of instances, particularly at the airport with delayed arrivals, that are coming to mind. So thank you so much for those examples. My next question for you is, what is something you wish co-sponsor teams would take into consideration before committing to provide co-sponsorship?
Yeah, this is also a question that I think you touched on a little bit, but burnout is really real in co-sponsorship. And I think we see so many of our teams that develop emotional connections with the families they're working with, and that makes them really want to commit to being with families all the time, sometimes every day of the week. But unfortunately, we see that can lead to burnout. So I think really knowing that burnout is really real in this work is something teams could really take a moment to consider before they jump in. I also think something that's really important for teams to know is that not every family is the same. And so we have some families that work with teams who are so willing off the bat to like really throw themselves into that relationship with the team, and so eager to share about their lives and personal details. But other families may need some more time to open up. They might just be the kind of people who they need to work on that relationship for a little bit. And so I would say, exactly like you said earlier, going into it knowing that your expectations may not perfectly reflect the experience is really key.
Yeah, I think that's so, so important to keep in mind. I was just imagining, or trying to imagine while you were speaking, Cassandra, of if I were to move with my family to a brand new country and have a group of individuals that were strangers to me pick me up at the airport and then say, hi, we're here to be with you along this entire road, or for the next 6 months or however long. It's quite an experience, and there's so much I think that clients are going through, without the co-sponsorship even being in the picture, and then then there's co-sponsorship included as well. It's a lot.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And families are you know, they've been through so many different things, and we never know. For instance, I've talked to families who've been in a refugee camp for 8 years before they came to the U.S. And they have a really different experience, maybe from a family who was resettled really quickly. And so all of those experiences are going to lead people to have different reactions to a co-sponsorship. I think
Absolutely.
almost all of them positive, but maybe just hard for us as local agencies to tell you exactly how people are going to respond to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that answer, Cassandra. That was really insightful. My next question for you is, what are some best practices you can share about co-sponsors working collaboratively with staff?
Absolutely. So one of the best things I can say is if your local agency has specialized trainings for you, please participate in those. The agencies where the most people possible on a team come to our trainings are usually the ones that really thrive the most in relationships. So please do participate in trainings, because those are designed to give you the tools to help make a relationship successful. The other part of this you mentioned as well, but communication is key. So here at Exodus, we have team leads who have either a weekly or every other week meeting with our co-sponsorship staff member once that group is matched with a family, so that they are staying in regular communication. And so we have an expectation that you'll run that communication through us, but I know other agencies sometimes work more closely with case managers or other staff members. So I would say just listen to what your agency says about the best way to communicate, and then please do keep us in the loop. We want to be talking to you about what's going on and what's changing. And sometimes families tell our co-sponsors things before they tell us. So that communication is really helpful for us as well, to kind of stay in touch and keep everything going. And I'll also say, like you said, sometimes we're not on call after a certain hour. So if you email me at midnight, I probably won't get back to you until the next morning, but I will get back to you the next morning. So making sure we have healthy boundaries and communication with staff members is also really key.
I love that. Thank you. I'm noticing we're at 12:40, so I'm going to skip one question and ask you my favorite question, which is, what is your favorite thing about working with co-sponsors?
I love this question too. Co-sponsors can develop really special relationships with families, because co-sponsors really get to pour into one family in a way that agency staff were working with hundreds of families. And those relationships, I get to see sometimes how they develop and how special they are. Exodus has co-sponsors who sponsored people 8 years ago who, got to go to the kids' high school graduations recently and get to celebrate those moments with them and really see the long-term impact. And they've really transformed into friends. So they're not still doing those responsibilities. They haven't created dependency, but they are people who are forming community with clients and really getting to see the long-term success of their refugee families. And I love getting to celebrate with them that, you were a part of that 8 years ago. You helped make this high school graduation happen because of what you did so many years ago. So that's my favorite part about working with co-sponsors, is getting to see those long-term friendships develop.
Wonderful. I'm so excited. Like, a part of me is like, oh my gosh, I'm jealous. I wish I could sponsor a family, but it's really exciting, like, being on the other end of that and getting to facilitate that as well. Thank you so much, Cassandra. That was really, really helpful. And it was insightful for me, so I hope it was insightful for other folks. Derek, I'd love to pass it back to you for a Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cassandra and Aisha. I really appreciate it and appreciate your insights and your willingness to share. And I definitely got a little verklempt thinking about the being a sponsor and getting to witness with that family a high school graduation. It's a really cool thing. Okay, yeah, I do just kind of want to say we've got just another minute or two, there is a questions pane over there. So please, if you do have a question for our guests, please still have another minute to put that in the questions pane there. before we kind of end, I'll just see if anyone has good. It looks like maybe one or two people had some. Great, awesome. Yeah, and we'll have just time for maybe one or two here. Someone is asking, they said, a Nicaraguan family asked them to sponsor them. Can CWS help with that? So this, yeah, Aisha, would you like to give some insight for that?
Yeah. That is a great question, and I unfortunately am not the person to assist with that, but we do have a staff member that works with private sponsorship, which would be the pathway for that Nicaraguan family. I don't want to say any more because I would be making stuff up, but if you would like to share your email address in the chat, Derek can get that over to me and I can follow up with you individually.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for that question. And yeah, we'll make sure to follow up with you if, yeah, great. Thank you for sharing your email address. We'll get that. And also just include as part of the follow-up, some sort of contact for you to.
Yes, please.
Got that. And that really is takes us to the end of our session for today. I do just want to thank Cassandra and Aisha again for presenting today, and to thank everyone for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, and please feel free to share that with others. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Cassandra. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And as Grace put that in the last slide, there is a survey. If you would mind, if you have a second, to take your phone out and follow that link. And that's an opportunity for you all to share with us any ideas for future Lunch and Learns. Just let us know how we're doing. And if you have any ideas for future Lunch and Learn sessions or future presenters, please let us know. We're always happy to have that information. So thank you all again. And Cassandra and Aisha, just want to say thank you again, and you're welcome to leave. We're just going to leave this up for just another couple of seconds, just in case people are filling out this form here. So thank you all again.